Here's something I'm willing to bet most of you are familiar with. This is the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System. Nintendo's first foray into home consoles, of course not counting the Pong machines they had previously made. Many of the games released for the NES are today considered classics, and are still played by older gamers with an appreciation for their roots and a strong sense of nostalgia, and younger gamers who wish to experience the beginnings of important franchises. Thing is, most of the time, NES classics are not played on an actual NES. There's remakes of the games, compilations for modern systems, and of course there's the Wii's Virtual Console. And let's not forget emulation, the illegal underbelly of classic gaming. Although some of the reason these games are played like this is out of simple convenience, the difference between booting up an emulator and dusting off your childhood NES may also be because the games don't work all that well anymore. And guess what? It's probably your fault. You put the cartridge in the system, turn it on, and the game comes up. That's how it's supposed to work, but it doesn't always happen that way. Even a brand new NES and game would sometimes malfunction and not work properly. So you try it again and again until it finally does work. Or perhaps you consult the system's manual and you learn that the problem might be that the cartridge or inside of the console is dirty. Dust, dirt, and debris can interfere with the console's operation. So what do? You blow. You blow in the system, you blow on the cartridges, and usually that works, and you're able to play your game. Well, it works, so now every time your game doesn't come up right away, you take the cartridge out and you blow on it, and maybe even blow into the system itself. Some of you may have even started to preemptively blow onto a cartridge before even trying it, just in case there's any dust in there. After all, if there's dust on the cartridge and you insert it into your NES, you might be moving the dust into the system where it's harder to get rid of, right? Well, this seems to make a whole lot of sense, but the truth is, you're doing way more harm than good. And it's the reason that a lot of your NES games either won't work anymore or work very intermittently today. So that's this episode's Urban Legends, that blowing on your cartridges is beneficial. First, let's get into the reason why the NES had such problems reading games. After all, you never really had that problem with the Super NES, or the Genesis, or the N64, so why did it happen with the NES? You might reason that the technology just got better, but that's not really the case, as systems released before the NES, such as the Atari 2600, really didn't have that issue. Well, let's take a look at some cartridge-based consoles. Tell me what they all have in common. There's the Atari 2600, the Atari 5200, the Atari 7800, the Master System, the Super NES, the Genesis, the Neo Geo, and the Nintendo 64. All of these are what we call top-loading systems, meaning that you push the game down into a slot to connect it to the system. There were some systems out there that weren't top-loaders, like Intellivision, but they still followed the simple formula of pushing the cartridge into the slot. For the NES, you open the little door, push the console into the machine, and then push it downwards, locking it into place. It was kind of a novelty back then, believe it or not. There's something very satisfying about pushing the cartridge down into place and hearing that satisfying click. But it was a poor design choice. See, the connectors on a cartridge are made up of a series of pins. An NES cartridge has 72 pins, and they connect to a row of connectors inside the console once the cartridge is in position. The problem has to do with the design choice of pushing the cart down into place. See, the reason the NES design is so unique is because the video game crash, which almost ended the industry. Video games were no longer seen as being viable businesses. And consumers were fed up with video games as companies like Atari had flooded the market with poor shovelware titles and butchered ports of arcade titles. In Japan, Nintendo created the Famicom, which stands for Family Computer. They called it the Family Computer to differentiate it from a video game console in the eyes of a consumer. This wasn't some game system like the Atari, this was a computer for the family. In America, the video game industry was even poorer, and Nintendo took more drastic measures, referring to the system as an entertainment system, including things like a robot that moves blocks with it and a gun, and calling the console itself the control deck. The design was meant to resemble a VCR, not a gaming console. For those of you too young to remember VHS tapes, they were inserted into the VCR much like an NES cartridge, only the pushing down and locking into place was done by the deck itself using a system called a zero insertion force, or ZIF. It was designed to get the tape into place without damaging it. By the way, this is why your grandma always called the cartridges Nintendo tapes. The problem is the NES did not use a zero insertion force, but only resembled it, which means that you do have to force the cartridge into place. Each time you push an NES cartridge down, you're bending the pins slightly, and also tilting the CPU inside of the cartridge. Bending the pins causes them to wear out, and each time they bend a little bit more, resulting in them being curved away from the connectors to the system, making it harder to make a solid connection. Bending the CPU inside the cartridge also wears it out further, leading to the entire pin array to become slightly loose inside the plastic casing, once again making it difficult to ensure a proper connection. This causes the NES to have difficulties reading cartridges, and also makes it more susceptible to interference from dust, dirt, and debris, and also causes that gray screen. Another reason why NES games wouldn't work is because of the differing design of the cartridges. In Japan, the Famicom used a 60-pin connector, but in America it uses 72 pins. 4 pins were added for a lockout chip, which made it difficult to play unlicensed games, and another 10 pins were added to connect to an expansion slot on the bottom of the console that wound up never really being used. That's actually 74 pins. 2 pins that allowed sound expansions were removed, which is why games such as Castlevania 3 didn't have the enhanced sound featured in the Japanese version. Some of the earliest cartridges didn't even use this new setup properly. Early games such as Gyromite used the same 60-pin Famicom design with a converter thrown in, which is why you could take those games apart and use the components to make it possible for your NES to play Famicom games. Anyway, that 4-pin lockout chip called the 10NES chip was the problem. You see, cartridges were only manufactured by Nintendo and certain companies that they authorized to make the carts, which had to comply with certain regulations regarding the 10NES chip. If the NES does not detect full contact from the 10NES lockout chip in a cartridge, it will repeatedly reset the console. Problem is, if your cartridges have pins that are all bent out of shape from inserting the game too many times, it won't make full contact with the NES connectors, causing the console to think that you're trying to play an unlicensed game. This is the source of the console resetting itself repeatedly, which is why you get that blinking power button. It's actually possible to remove one of the 4 pins in the console that apply to the lockout chip, which will not only remove all lockout effects and allow you to play unlicensed cartridges, but will make all of your games work better. But most people aren't taking apart their NESs and ripping pieces out, so people took to many different methods to get their games to work properly, such as hitting the console, jiggling the cartridge while it's in the system, holding the reset button, and of course the old standby of blowing on the cartridge to clean it. Nintendo didn't help matters by claiming that the issues were due to dirty cartridges and not a design flaw, releasing worthless products such as the official cleaning kits and opening official Nintendo repair stations all over the place. Well, why pay money when air is free, right? Just blow on the fuckers. Well, the reason blowing on a cartridge works has almost nothing to do with dust and everything to do with moisture. Go ahead and take a normal AA battery and hold the positive end against your arm. Nothing happens. Now lick it. You feel a mild tingling sensation in your tongue. That's because water is a superb conductor of electricity. The wetter your tongue is, the sharper the sensation is. By the way, don't really do this. It's retarded and will just drain your batteries. Blowing on the cartridges causes the moisture in your breath to coat the pins, ensuring a better connection. So why is this bad? Because the pins are made out of copper, and copper corrodes over time with repeated exposure to moisture. Corroded pins make it more difficult to get a good connection, which makes the games work less, which makes you blow on them more, and it's a vicious cycle that ends with your games just not working. So what do? Well, some people advocate cleaning the connectors with a Q-tip and solutions such as alcohol or Windex, but this is just as bad. It's adding more moisture. The truth is, it all comes down to the design flaws of the NES, so the best way to get around it is to not play the games on an NES. Get one of these fuckers instead. Yeah, that's an NES 101 model, also known as the NES 2, also known as the top loader. It's far superior in design to the original NES. It's a top-loading system, so it won't damage your games, and it does not include the 10 NES lockout mechanism, which means you could even play unlicensed games or imports from Europe. Not only that, but it has better controllers. Of course, you could just use a Game Genie instead and bypass the pin connectors. So, I hope I've cleared up some misconceptions, and those of you who still play your NES carts, hopefully you'll stop blowing on the damn things. And hey, don't feel too bad. Although I did say that it's probably your fault for blowing on them, that they don't work anymore, it really goes down to Nintendo's design flaws. Then again, they did tell you not to blow on the cartridges. Oh well. Join me next time, and we'll talk about a whole bunch of shit that you can't do in games.